I can't tell when it's working, so you need to let me know. Need to let me know. Is it going live? Am I live? Let's see if I can. You there? Everybody there? Okay. I know that I'm just gonna assume it's filming. I'll start talking and hopefully this works. I'm not sure. I know I got a text from somebody saying it wasn't going live, so I'm not sure if it's live. So I'm gonna assume it's live. Okay. I'm just gonna start by saying, oh my Lanta, this almost didn't happen. That's what happens when you have a big mouth. Literally. Couple days ago, I posted a really, on my personal page, not the Saratoga Jack's page, I posted kind of a rant about what's the way homeschoolers are getting trashed in the media. And it went totally viral. I mean, like viral. And Facebook shut my account down last night. Like up till an hour ago, I didn't think I had a Facebook account anymore. So, and they said they did it for my security, which is weird. So, anyway, we're going to be, as you come on, I guess, just say that you're here. I've talked to a couple people this morning that have been trying to log in. If you don't get in and I just keep teaching, that's fine too, because I can just repost this whole thing later. So, oh look, I'm getting thumbs up. Okay, so somebody's coming in. Okay, good deal. All right. Today we're going to be talking all about sourdough. But before we get started on talking about grains and all that, I wanted to talk a little bit about a personal story. Nobody gets into a major lifestyle change without a reason. Like usually it starts out with somebody gets sick or somebody can't eat the same way that they used to. And in our family, and this is a long time ago, you have to go back like 20 years ago. And some of you know my personal story, but it started with our oldest daughter. She got ulcerative colitis in her colon from her kindergarten shots. And so it's one of the reasons I've fought for safer medications. And when it first happened, I didn't know what to do. There was no internet there might have been for the military, but there wasn't places where you could go to Google and get information. So I started to research in libraries, and I was doing everything I could to heal her without the need of having surgery. Ulcerative colitis in a 5-year-old is really scary. I learned a lot about the intestinal wall and about how once you have holes in your intestinal wall, so whether it's a real ulcer like colitis or whether it's leaky gut, I must need a water. I don't have a water. Okay. But whatever way it's happening. Oh, mercy, I really need a water. Hey, Jack. Yes. I swallowed like a bug or something. Could you bring me a water? Yeah. Like I got something in my throat. Anyway. So when she had ulcerative colitis, and a lot of people now are having issues with like leaky gut and allergies, and they're having gluten issues. They can't eat foods the way they used to. They get like gassy and intestinal problems, bloating, stomach aches, reactions, and those sort of symptoms. It's not always just gluten that you're intolerant to. You become intolerant to a lot. Allergies begin to build. And my one daughter that had the ulcerative colitis 20 years ago, she ended up having, before we got her gut healed, she had more than 90 things she was allergic to. So it was a trickle-down effect. And while I was doing my research 20 years ago, which meant a library, right, because you didn't have Google, I started to really discover the importance of the digestive lining. You want to think of your digestive lining almost like a net. it has extremely small holes in it that only allows like specific substances to pass through. Well, what are some of the things that we want to pass through? Nutrients. Like as our body's breaking down the foods, we want the nutrients to get in our bloodstream. But if those holes get too big, things that are not supposed to pass through start to pass through, including proteins like gluten or bad bacteria, undigested food particles. This is the kind of the beginning of most a lot of disease, actually. A lot of autoimmune disease starts this way. So back when I was doing this research 20 years ago, and look, I don't even find it surprising now that the more I read on this, some more people are becoming sensitive. There are 4 things that can damage your intestinal lining. And one of them is our American diet. It's just crap. There's just no other way around it. It's just crap. We aren't eating the way that our grandparents ate. We have far more, and toxins is a part of that. We have far more chemicals and GMOs and pesticides and preservatives in our foods today than they had. I was watching like Good Morning America about 10 years ago, and they put a steak on the counter, and the steak was a completely organic grass-fed steak that was equivalent to what our grandparents were buying at the supermarket. And then they put a steak that you buy today on the counter, and they said that when they tested it, the steak that you buy today had something like 27 different toxins and obesicides, simply because of the grains they had fed the cattle, the shots they'd given the cattle that were different from what had been used 20 years earlier, the glyphosate, I think that's how you say it, that was spread on the food that they were feeding. So they were like, even though it's still an 8-ounce steak, you are fighting way more in everything you eat. And a lot of times these paleo diets, we end up going on more meats and more proteins and steering away from these carbs. Now the carbohydrates, that got really complicated. So we have what they call Franken grains now, which it's basically these grains, the way that they're splicing them and making GMO. And like, I'm not a scientist, right? But I understand that what they're growing today was not the same thing they were growing 30, 40, 100, 200 years ago. And then I came across an article when I was searching that was on yeast. Now, I didn't realize this, but all yeast prior to, I would say, really the 1970s, 80s, all yeast was more of a long rise yeast. These quick rise yeasts and fast Wonder Bread yeast that were put into the breads, they stopped allowing the natural process of breakdown that our ancestors had when they baked bread naturally. A lot of people today only think when they buy bread or when they make bread, it should take an hour to 2 hours tops. That wasn't the case. Not for thousands of years, that was not the case. So every piece of grain has these, they're hard, they're really hard. I'm going to show you a bunch of different grains, but they're hard like beans. And I always kind of say, if I gave you a cup of hard beans, like if I went and got a bunch of kidney beans and I handed you a cup of them and I said, I want you to ground those and eat them right now, you would just be like, no, you have to soak them for like 12 hours, Amy. They have to soak. You have to break down that phytic acid on them, and if I made you eat them raw and hard like that, you would get a stomach ache. But all the bread that we eat now today is like that. We're taking this hard grain that has the exact same acids and enzymes on the outside of them as like hard beans do, which is great, because those we always think of those things as negative. The reason that beans and grains are hard and have these protective acids on them is so we can store them for food storage or long term. That's why in this country we so far have never had so far, fingers crossed, we've never had like a major food shortage or plague, because our farmers can store these grains long term and these beans long term. And so the public has always been able to rely on at least rice and beans or bread and beans, right? So because we were able to store our previous season's yield and have it last. Anything else, and people are like, what do you mean store it like that? When I store grains, I store them whole. I don't store them ground up like flour. Now, do I have flour? Of course, I've ground flour this week, so I have it. But I don't store it like that. And a lot of people think like when they're doing food storage, and I have to remember we're a food storage company first, or a preparedness company first, before we're a grain and sourdough company. But when you store grains, you don't store them like flour because they break down. I'll give you this example. If I bought an apple today and I took a bite out of it, I broke it, I smashed it, and then I put it in my basket on the counter, how long is that apple going to last before it looks like crap and I need to throw it out? An hour, maybe 2? You know, I know I've got kids. I got kids, they're biting apples all over the place, and I'm having to throw them out because there's brown apples everywhere that they didn't finish. When we break down the grain, we are doing the same thing. We're exposing it. So your flour, once it's ground, you get maybe 2 years maybe out of it, max. Really, you're not supposed to have it around. If you want it really fresh with the nutrients in it, it's like a month, you know. That's when the most nutrition is still in it. But if I store that same grain not cracked, if I store it whole, it's going to last 30 years. Which is incredible. It's like that apple, if you don't take a bite, it could sit there for a week, 10 days, until you're ready to eat it. There is a longer lifespan. So there's a reason that these acids and these things that are hard to digest are on the grains and on the beans. It's so that we can store them long term and have them when we need them in society. However, they're really hard on the gut. Well, Mother Nature, God, made it so that when we wanted to break them down in the past, He gave us this wonderful, wonderful thing called natural yeast. Now, I didn't make this. I didn't make it. Man did not make it. Yeast, in its natural form, literally is as old as the earth. It comes from the bacteria in the air. And it's a miracle that we can harness this thing. The yeast that our company uses is over 200 years old. And every week for 200 years, it is produced beautiful, organic, healthy, enzyme efficient, healthy bacteria, healthy probiotic filled breads. And what's amazing to me is 200 years after I'm dead, it will still do the same thing for my great-great-grandchildren. I remember when we first started doing food storage and I didn't know anything. I started from nothing. I remember saying, well, how do I store enough yeast for all this grain and rice and beans and things? Like, how do I do that in the fridge? How does that last? And is this going to work? And do I just learn to make Indian flatbread and not rise breads at all? Like, I had all sorts of questions. And then somebody explained to me about natural yeast and about this awesome miracle that's in the air and how you can ferment this bread and make it rise. And in fact, when the reason, like if you hear those stories in the Old Testament and stuff about how they were in a hurry before they left Egypt and so they had to eat unleavened bread, it just means they didn't have the time to let the bread rise. That was it. They didn't do it intentionally. They just didn't have time. So they had pancakes instead of bread that day, right? So we had a combination of 3 problems. One, we have to have these acids on the grain in order to protect them so that we can store them. 2, we have to understand that there has to be a way to break them down, and that takes time and knowledge, which we're going to talk about today. And 3, now we got this whole epidemic of gluten intolerance. Well, that came from this invention of something we call instant yeast. And it's because the 2 hours that this instant yeast is making that bread rise, and right, time is money in America, that's what we say, time is money, is also meaning that the time that we have, the time, oh, sorry, Rachel, I just saw, Rebecca, I just saw your post. I'm glad you found me. The time that we have is limited, so we have to figure out how to do it without like being hands-on and helicopter cooking all the time. And I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but one of the big issues that I have is that this is a whole mindset thinking. It's like you have to switch your whole mindset. I don't even allow bread into my home anymore that comes from the store. I don't allow it. I quit that a long time ago. And, I'm going to go straight to talking about and we can talk about gut health and how to heal the gut separately. I'm going to do this lesson from the assumption that you've already healed your gut issues, and now you want to go back to, you miss bread. See, that's the problem, is we go on these like paleo type diets, and we go on these cleanses, and we get our gut cleaned, which I'm going to teach you how to do that if you want to talk about it. But then we don't know how to like ease back on to the fiber that we were given. And the media and the people are crucifying grains when grain was the greatest gift given to man. It literally sustained man for centuries, so that we didn't have to slaughter animals. And it didn't just sustain us, it sustained the animals. Many of them that we do slaughter, they rely on it. So we got to go back to what went wrong. And what I believe, and this is my personal belief, is that when we introduced instant yeast, we destroyed the process that was actually given to man to break down the things that are bad for us at the same time of creating the things that are good for us. So, all right, let's roll it back. So we know the 4 things that damage the gut are, and let me just read it out loud so I make sure I touch on it. Here they are. Okay. The 4 things that we need to remove are stress, crappy foods, toxins, and for a season, we might need to remove the things that are hard on the intestines to grow. So the things that I had to do 20 years ago to heal Bailey's gut was I had to remove the foods that were damaging her gut. I had to replace those foods with healing foods, and I'm going to give you a list of those to do some research on. And then I had to repair her gut with specific supplements. And then I had to rebalance it. And then once we did that, she went back to eating pretty normal diet, other than I never brought in the crap yeast foods again. I only brought in the natural yeast with the long-term growth. So some of the products that, and I don't have my thing with me, some of the products that we use just off the top of my head was, and I know if some of you have been dealing with issues with gluten intolerance or stomach issues, you'll know this, but we used bone broth. We used bone broth like all the time. And when I didn't give it to her straight, I was mixing it in with our foods. We used homemade yogurts. And I've got a great recipe for that we do in our thermal cooker. We used kefir. Now some of these you might not be able to use because you don't you have like now you have an allergy to milk products too, because the leaky gut syndrome just leads from one thing to the next. We used coconut oil products. Coconut is very healing to the gut, very healing. We use something called quercetin, which the more I read about this herb, the more I wished I'd used it more, a lot more. Quercetin is spelled Queurse, Cetin, quercetin. And that herb is not only an anti-inflammatory, antihistamine, which is great if you're dealing with food allergies, but it's very healing to the gut. I found out Dr. Axe is using it to help heal leaky gut syndrome. So that's great. Another product we use religiously, if you know our story, is colostrum. And I'll just show you a quick bottle of it here. I'm actually I started out talking to you in Bastion works from here sometimes with his clients. He works at a chiropractor's, and this is the product that I don't know if I can switch this around. Here we go. It's called Immune Tree Colostrum 6. I actually met with the doctor 20 years ago, and that's all I'm going to show you. We wholesale this. We sell it cheaper than anybody else, including Amazon, and I've kept that for 20 years as one of the things that we sell in our company because of what it did for Bailey. It literally saved her. She didn't have to have the surgery that they thought she was going to need. So, all right, I'm walking into our pantry. I want to just show you right now. I'm going to turn this around. By the way, before I go off the subject, the reason we use the colostrum is it's because it's the first food in life. The very first food you get as a baby. It's the thing that primes your gut, your immune system. And because leaky gut syndrome and autoimmune disease are all tied to that, that's why we used it religiously. It actually healed her ulcerative colitis, and we ended up avoiding surgery, which 20 years ago, the doctors were asking us, what did you just do? They didn't know about it. There was no Google to look it up. So the reason I use the colostrum 6 over the other colostrums is, one, it's made here in Utah and in the United States, and I've met with the doctor who makes it, which makes me feel more comfortable than the stuff that's coming from New Zealand and overseas. But two, they guaranteed they collected it 6 hours after birth, so there was no milk that had been, you know, like milk that had transferred into it, that it was pure colostrum. And it's been like double-blind studied by 4 or 5 different universities, and they're saying still the same thing. It's the best stuff on the market you can get. So that's why we use it. All right. And that's enough about it because I'm not an expert. I'm in my pantry, just so you can see. Let me move this junk out of the way. This is actually where I do, this is like my gift stuff. See, this is like, we actually live here. I do a lot of demos in this space because it works and I keep all my stuff. What I wanted to show you before we went to baking, and Jack's like out in the kitchen prepping all the food, is there are so many different grains, And some of the ancient grains are completely different than the new grains. So I talked about earlier that we have these Franken grains. They have genetically modified some of the grains so much that I'm trying to separate the flours from the wheat here. Hold on just a second. There's the flours. There's the flours. Spelt flour. Okay. All right. Let me see if I can do this with one hand. Okay, here we go. I'm just going to open one and I'll put the camera up to the others. See if I can. Oh, it's tight. Hey, Jack, I might need your fingers, man. Oh, I got it. Never mind. I'm good. Okay, so this is white wheat. White wheat is been genetically modified a lot. Actually, a lot of the wheat products that are causing problems for people come from the white and red wheat. So that's why a lot of people have been avoiding wheat. It's because over time they increase the gluten unnaturally. So a lot of the grains that have been genetically modified, the gluten content is super high. It's like 11% even in some cases, depending on the grain. So this is that beautiful grain I told you would store for 30 years in this state. Now, a lot of people have never seen some of these grains and the differences when they're in their whole state of what they look like. Rye is really interesting. All right, Jack, no, I really do need your hands. Okay, here we go. Rye, if you look at the color difference, this is white wheat and this is rye. It's almost like blue-gray. And the bread it makes is almost blue-gray. It's a very interesting color. If you could open these up for me, Jack, and then I can just talk about what's in them. So what I discovered over the years is I was switching our diet. When I first moved to Utah, I about had a heart attack because they didn't have a Trader Joe's within 400 miles of me. And I was asking the grocer for spelt bread, and they didn't even know what I was talking about. I couldn't figure out how I'd moved to this land of healthy living where nobody had a health food store. But over the years, I've tried definitely different grains with the family. And there is a huge difference between, are these the flours? Yeah. Yeah, if you can open those up and just set them aside, I'll read them later. Okay, let me look at this one. So this one is oat groats. So I don't store my oats for food storage flat, like steel cut oats. I love steel cut oats, but I don't store them like that. I actually store it like this because these will store for 30 years. And then I have an oat roller that actually rolls out big, fat, thick oats right when I need it. Oats actually, interestingly enough, that's fine. They don't have like any gluten in them. Isn't that crazy? So here's a grain that you could grind into a flour that would technically be gluten-free. Part of the reason I'm talking about this is there's a ton of you out there that are spending a crap load on your flours for your gluten-free breads. If you can get oat groats and use those, that's like in bulk in this type of and then you can run it through a grinder. You can actually make flour with that. It's beautiful flour. Actually, let me show you the oat flour. When I'm cooking with, I got oat flour somewhere around here. Where is my oat flour? Is it out with you, Jack? I wish I had it. Oat flour is the closest to white flour I've ever seen when you grind it up. So there's a unprocessed natural grain that is got like 0 gluten that has beautiful flour if you need something light. In fact, I read a lot of old pioneer recipe books. When they had to make wedding cakes, they often made them out of oat flour. Isn't that interesting? Because they wanted them to be white and pretty even back then before they had processed flours. So this one is Spelt. Spelt is interesting because it's an ancient grain and its gluten content is way lower. It's like 1/3 of what wheat, the wheat products we have today are. Here's rye. Again, rye is a significantly lower gluten content naturally. They have the ones they haven't genetically modified. There are very few that they haven't. Kamut. This is a really interesting grain. It's much bigger. It almost is the color of popcorn, and when you grind it up, it actually looks like yellow. It's a very golden flour. Kamut comes out of Egypt, and when you read about in the scriptures that they had put up grain for 7 years for the famine in Egypt, the grains that they use, they say wheat, but this is technically their wheat. So kamut, this is exactly, and it has been unmodified. They have, because of that 7-year famine in biblical times, the Egyptians have protected this grain for thousands of years. And it is technically the original so-called wheat that was stored by the Egyptians. And there's even really extensive laws in the United States of you can't experiment on it, you can't bust it. It's a really hard grain. It's the hardest for me to grind actually by hand, which is interesting to me because it has a good shelf store. Okay, and then you can compare to see the genetic modification over time, like how big that is versus how small that is. That's the red wheat. This is the one that's the highest in protein currently we have today, which means it's the highest in gluten content. So when people really have problems with wheat, this is usually the one that throws them for a loop. It's been genetically modified. What's this one? Red Fife. Okay, this is a really new, interesting one that we just have been using this last year. It's called Red Fife. It comes out of Scotland. Fascinating stuff. It has a really, really nutty taste, and compared to the other grains, it's closer to Spelt on the gluten content, much lower. Here is barley. It's pretty white stuff. This is why I said the barley flour looks so pretty. White barley flour and oat flour, the closest to the looks of white flour, and such low gluten content. So, all right. Sometimes we think when we're making bread that we need to use one grain. And so we always think, I can't have bread. But that's just not the case. You can use low gluten grains and get a much lower gluten content. So those who are not celiac, but they're gluten intolerant, just even lowering the gluten content when you do use it is helpful, especially if you use it with the sourdough. All right, I'm going to switch out of this room. We're going to go walking into the kitchen. You ready for me out here? Oh, look at Jack. He's so good. He's been getting stuff ready for us all morning. All right, can I show them our sourdough start? Do we have that in a jar? Oh, can you bring it over here for me then? Yeah. So it's in the view of what I can show them. Jack's really good. He always lays out butcher paper on my counter so I have easy cleanup. Okay, so let me talk to you about our start. This is, can I open it? There we go. Thank you. Isn't that beautiful? Okay. So I wish you could smell it. This is over 200 years old. It's completely organic. It's full of healthy probiotic and healthy bacteria and acids. And all of them work together to break down the gluten content in the breads on an 8 to 12 hour rise. So let me give you an example. On wheat bread, which I consider the highest gluten content that I could ever make, it starts out at something like, I think it's like 124 or 127,000 parts gluten per million. So when I'm making that bread, 124 to 127,000 parts gluten per million is a lot of gluten when you're looking at the scientific structure of the bread. After 12 hours, that same wheat bread is down to 12 parts per million. So it goes like from 124,000 to 12. Anything under 20, now I'm going to repeat this twice. Anything, can you hear me? Is the sound still muffled? You're saying it's muffled. Can you hear me? I'm asking you guys, can you hear me? Is this not, you're not hearing me at all? Good now. Okay. All right. Okay. So anything that's under 20 parts per million, anything that's under 20 parts per million is considered gluten-free. Like legally in the United States, if you have gluten under 20 parts per million in the US, it can be labeled gluten-free. Now, how important is what I just told you if you are struggling with gluten intolerance? Pretty important. It means that a long enough slow rise using good probiotic-rich yeast can get your wheat, which I consider the worst gluten, technically down to a level where the United States would have to label it gluten-free. Now, you would never be able to say you didn't use wheat product, but you would be able to say that scientifically it was gluten-free. So I know if I am working with a 12-hour rise and red wheat, and I'm getting it down to 12 parts per million from like 100, I swear it's like 124,000 or 127,000. I have to go back and read the report. It was either a 4 or 7. So if I'm going from that down to 12 in 12 hours, what is it going to do to my breads that I'm not using wheat on? It's going to take less time because the other ones don't have as high of a gluten content. So now you understand our pioneers didn't have a problem with gluten because this is all they ever used. They never damaged their guts with too much gluten in the first place. That's the difference between them and us. They never were exposed to this high level of gluten. And gluten is hard on the body. If you've ever looked at it under a microscope, it looks like little razors. It's not the most pleasant thing to look at. So they didn't have to deal with it because they were using, this is all they had to use. Anyway, so I'm going to show you now how to feed it. So one of the things that we wanted to tell you guys today is we have figured out a way legally to ship this around the United States. This has taken us a year to figure out how to take a wet product and in under 7 days, seal it hermetically and get it to you. I'm really excited about this because Saratoga Jacks this week is launching an ability to get the live culture everywhere for under $10, which is super exciting. And one of the things that I was going to show you right now is what you would do to keep yours alive once you get it. Jack, if you could get me, yeah, just set that down there. If you could just get me a mason jar and a spoon, I will do this. So the first thing that you do when you get it is to know that it's going to be hungry, starving, and a little unhappy that I shipped it to you. So you're going to want to immediately reconstitute it and feed it and give it some time to grow and develop. Now, you can make your own starts. There's all sorts of, I just need my stirring stick and a spoon. Okay? And is there some flour out here? There. Okay, if you can just set the flour right there, that would be great. Okay. All right. So when you get your start, it will be about this much. That's it. It's going to be about a tablespoon. I'm going to be putting it in a 3-ounce package, but I have to give it enough room in case it expands in its journey. So I want you to immediately empty it out of the hermetically sealed package into a clean mason jar. So it's going to look just like that when you get it. Okay? And it's going to be hungry. So the next thing you need to do is give it some water. Now wait, before Jack pours it, I wanted to show you the water is sitting out in a jar. I have over in my window, let me see if I can zoom in so you can see this. Can you see that? Do I need to walk over? I have sitting in my window. Do you see those pictures? I always have a pitcher of water sitting in and just out on my counter. And some of you are going to be like, what? Okay, there's a couple things that can kill your yeast. Kill it dead. And that is chlorine in your water. This is 200 years old, and you could kill it in one day with chlorinated water, which unfortunately most of America's tap water has chlorine in it. So I always have those pitchers full of water because chlorine is technically a gas. And if I put the pitcher of water out there and it's sitting there for more than 24 hours, I now have technically non-chlorinated water. It just needs an open surface for the gas to come off of. So I keep it in water, and I'm going to end up pouring about a cup's worth of water in there. You don't need to worry about exact measurements. You just want to give it enough so that it is happy. And then I'm going to feed it. Now, I'm going to feed it with something that makes you guys mad because it's not my good, healthy, fresh grains. I feed it unbleached. Again, no chlorine, no chemical processing. White wheat flour. Why do I do that? This is called a spurtle, by the way. This is my Scottish roots coming out. Jack will go ahead and stir it for you.
This is one Levi made you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Levi actually carved this one for me. I was really proud of him. Okay, that's not enough still. Let me show you how far you have to go. See, it's kind of runny still. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to add some more. This is how simple it is. It's just unchlorinated water, unchlorinated cheap flour. All right, you see how it's getting thick enough that Jack's like, he's struggling. It's hard to stir. Okay. Okay, this is how thick you want it to be. Ready? So that your spoon or spurtle or whatever you're using can stand up in it. Why? It now has enough food and water with a lid on this to last a full week in your fridge. That's important because you're not always going to be around.
It'll thin out over time.
It will thin out as it digests that flour. It will become thinner again, and it will eventually look just like this. You see how this is soupy and those bubbles are alive? Okay. So now what I want you to do, since you just got this package, is put your lid on. Jack went to go get us a lid for this. And the first 24 hours, I don't want you to put it in the fridge. I want you to put a lid on it and set it on the counter. So your 1 tablespoon. Yes, Mindy, it is white, all-purpose, unbleached flour. It's the most natural flour I can have. People ask me why I don't use the other ancient grains. There's a reason. I'll explain in a minute. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to have, this is what you're going to do once you get it. You're going to do just this. And leave it alone. That's all you're going to do the first day. You're going to let it sit out someplace warm that first day. The second day, you're going to give it another cup of water and some flour, stir it all up, and you're going to put it in your fridge with the lid on. Now, I know this is different. No, the water can be room temperature, Rebecca. Very good question. Okay, so in the books, or everybody tells you, they're going to tell you, let it breathe, let it breathe, let it breathe. Let me tell you something. This is 200 years old. I do not keep it in my kitchen or in my fridge without a lid on it. Whether it's in a mason jar or a big jar, I never do. Why? Because I already explained, yeast is natural, it's in the air. This is 200 years old, is so proofed, I've never been able to kill it. Remember I said there were a couple things that could kill it? The first thing is chlorine, so that's why we use the non-chlorinated water. The second thing that can kill it is the crappy instant synthetic yeast you guys have in your fridge or in your freezer. Or in the donuts you bought yesterday. Or in the crap bread you put on your counter. That stuff is evil. It's like the two of them, if you put them together, if I stuck a bowl of this next to a bowl of synthetic yeast, they would begin to foam and writhe and grow at such an expansive rate, and it could actually kill the natural yeast in a battle. It's a bacteria battle in the air that you can't see. So when people say to me, hey, Amy, I killed your start, or I just killed it again, I forgot to feed it, my guess is it had nothing to do with that, because I have gone 2 weeks without feeding this as long as I made it so thick, gave it so much water and made it so thick while stirring it that it had enough food and water. And then I put it in the coldest part of my fridge to slow it down, the growth and the eating. And I was able to go on, vacation for a couple weeks and come back and have beautiful yeast still living.
We went to Maine for 22 days.
Yeah, we did. Actually, will you do me a favor? I had somebody feed our yeast once when we were gone for 22 days, though. Can you bring me my tablet? I want to show them a picture of what happens when you go too long without feeding your yeast. Now, in all the ones that you see online, how to make your own yeast, how to feed your yeast, all of that stuff. Why is this so dingy? Oh, the light's down. Okay. All right, let me see if I can pull this up. I took a photo of it yesterday because I wanted to share it with you. Where's my pictures? Listen, talk. Talk, smile. Okay. Gallery. Okay, let me see if I can find you. There it is. Okay. This says last fed 10 days ago, and it's got this like amber colored stuff on the top of it. When you go too long without feeding your yeast, what happens is that's actually, that top little part right there, that's actually grain alcohol. And when you open it, you'll be like, woo, it smells like moonshine, I kid you not. What you need to do is realize your start is drunk a little bit. So just go ahead and pour off that top alcohol layer. Just dump it down the sink or wash your hands with it if you're going to do surgery or something. I don't know. That's what yours looks like on day 2, Rachel, because you aren't using a good yeast or a good start. Sorry. So how do I explain this? My start was made in the Czech Republic 200 years ago. It's the most proof start I've ever used. What you may have started or purchased locally in your area, you don't control the bacteria in the air in your area. So the bacteria in your area may not be the best to use. It may not produce the best flavors. And by the way, every yeast produces a different flavor. The only yeast in the world that is truly like trademarked is the San Francisco sourdough yeast. And it has a specific bacteria in it that they can pick up. So I'm going to just go over this one more time because it's not complicated, but I need to say it. When you feed your yeast, you need unbleached water, unbleached flour. Now, somebody asked me about the flour, so I'm going to touch on that again. Why do I use regular, unbleached, what I call the crappiest flour on the planet to feed my yeast? Well, for one, I'm not feeding myself with it. That's the first thing. For two, it keeps the flavor mild so that I have a choice when I go to make my breads if I'm making sweet bread, savory bread, mild bread, or really nutty, hearty 12-grain bread. I just use different grains in the actual bread making process. And three, if I can get wheat flour from 124,000 parts per million down to 12 in 12 hours while making bread, what do you think I'm going to be able to break the gluten that's in this junk down if it's sitting for a full week in my fridge? It's just going to end up, it's just the food that it needs. I don't actually eat it, okay? So that's why I do it. And it keeps it consistent so that no matter how I use it, it can go either way. If I started to add rye or other grains to this, it would completely change the entire consistency of it. And right now, it's as consistent as it's been in 200 years. So I'm not messing with the formula. It's just simply that much. It's just simply that. So, okay. So if I get this, I dump off So what did I say? I gotta go back. Remind me. Back up. Okay, so don't use, so when I feed it once a week. So it's like not something I have to baby every day. I dump off the alcohol if I go too long, and then I just give it more fresh water and flour. And then I always keep a lid on it, because the second thing that can kill it, despite what a lot of these cheaper natural yeast, they need to have air because they're barely surviving. They're not really a good bacteria. I keep this sealed up because I don't want any other yeast or bacteria from the air. I only have it open long enough to feed it, and then I put it back. I never cross-contaminate. I actually own several different sourdough starters. I do not even keep them in the same fridge. I have more than one fridge in my house. So I actually have one fridge in my kitchen, one old one in my garage, and then I have this like drink fridge here. And I have a mason jar of local start that I made myself off the Utah air that I keep in that drink fridge. I do not let it near this one. This one is like our prized possession. It makes the best bread. And so this start is the one that we are making sure gets out there. Why? Because if I ever kill mine, who am I going to be calling? You guys. We'll all be desperate if I kill mine. So anyway, all right, let me go to the next page. We already talked about this, but healthy natural start should look bubbly like this within a day or two. So after you fed it, after you get it and you feed it, it should look like this within a day or two. Feed it a couple more times, get it in the fridge with the lid on it, and then let it rest in there for a week until it is like healthy and bubbly and to the top like this of your mason jar. When that happens, you're going to be ready to make bread. And we're going to make bread right now. So Jack, are you ready to start making a batch of bread? Let's start at the beginning. Okay, let's pull, and I'm going to go over see if I can get the basic recipe up here. See if I can find it. Now here it is. Okay, I made this years ago, and by the way, we're gonna make sure the instructions to get started are on, can I rotate that? How do I rotate that? Do I just tip the thing? So auto rotate, love that, okay. When we send out a Saratoga Jack start of this 200-year-old awesome stuff, we'll make sure you not only get instructions of just how to feed it and get it started and looking healthy that first week, but I wanted you to see that you'll get this card, and it will have everything on it. It has the weekly instructions of how to keep feeding your bread once a week, okay, with reminders of what can kill it. And then it has the basic bread recipe. And then it even shows you, if you are going, right here, I'm going to point my finger there. If you're going to make artisan bread, add those options now. So all bread starts off the basic recipe, and then it gives you all these ideas to make really unique artisan breads over here that you can decide, okay? So that comes with everything. You don't need a big sourdough book. All right, I'm going to give you the tip that all recipe books and bakers don't want you to have. This is the basic recipe for any and all breads. For every cup of water you use, you will get approximately a loaf of bread, give or take, depending on the size of your loaf pans. So when I say 4 cups of water, you're going to know 3 to 4 loaves of bread, depending on the size of your loaf pans. If you only want to make 2 loaves of bread, how much water would you use? 2 to 3 cups.
I always weigh it.
Yeah. Jack, we weigh water?
No.
The way the bread.
The bread, no.
Yeah. Jack uses a specific amount of dough for each pan that we use, but we use these long, beautiful French loaf pans so 4 cups of water for us gives us 3 loaves of bread, But for here, and I'll give you an example. Here's the pans that we use. They're quite long. Do you have a regular standard pan so they can see the difference, Jack? By the way, for my own personal use, I never wash my pans. I just wipe them out and oil them. Okay, and there's the length of a regular. So you can see, I don't know if I can set them side by side. Let me do it over here. Okay. You can see, I like the height on these pans too. So I like those long ones. Okay, the other one's fatter. But all right, 4 cups of water is going to give you 3 to 4 loaves of bread. So those are your favorite pans too? Yeah, they're mine. So 4 cups of water. Now, why 4 teaspoons of salt? That's the exact salt ratio that every commercial bakery uses for every cup of water. So there's about a teaspoon of salt in every loaf of bread that you ever have eaten. Okay? So when I say 4 cups of water to 4 teaspoons of salt, and we're going to start there. Jack, why don't we go ahead and everything that we use here, we'll start with we're going to start with the basic and then show them what to do. Okay. So that is 4 cups of water. He already has it out. Okay. I don't actually have chlorine in my water here. We're on a well, so I've never had to worry about this. It will be a constant worry for all of you. Okay, Jack, wait, before you start, what are these big, huge bowls cost that we use all the time?
I like these ones here because they're wide and you can knead
the dough in them. Yeah, we actually need the dough in these when we're working with it later. So what? I don't know. We sell them on Saratoga Jacks. They're cheap. They're under $20 and they're huge. They're absolutely ginormous. Okay. So I'm going to show you something right now. When you cup your hand and you allow this little space to form, it's a really cool thing. Every adult, if you do that, it's a teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon. So this is why chefs, that's a little bit more than a teaspoon.
Yeah.
So
2.
2, 3, and 4. Okay. So there's 4 teaspoons. So the first thing, and I was going to say, we are religious about using only real sea salt. Okay. So I just like the flavor. It's a sweeter flavor. Plus, if it's not processed, I don't get bloated ever from salt when I'm using the real salt. I used to get horrible bloating when I used crappy processed salt. Yeah, iodized salt. So, all right. So that's the basic. Then the next thing we do is we add the starter. Oh, this is a Danish dough hook, and it's awesome. I'm not even going to lie. We have been looking for a supplier of these, and we have them coming in. So you'll be able to get these too coming soon. Again, like I think under $10 is what this is going to be. And it's like hard. I don't know if you can see, it doesn't bend, it doesn't give, which means it's perfect for doing dough. Okay, so Jack is showing you right now, he just added a cup of our start. Now, he's going to begin the process. Every week when we go to bake, our start is hungry. We fed it the week before. It's hungry. So when I add it to this water, it's starving. The very next thing you do, I'm just going to let that rest for a minute. Okay?
Blend it.
So water, salt, and start. That's all we got. They are perfect for dough. They're my favorite. I don't even need a mixer. I think everybody's under this delusion that they need like a $250 mixer to make bread. It just isn't true. A $10 dough hook and a, what is this, $12.99, $13.99 bowl, and you are in business. This is how they did it for thousands of years. Okay, the next thing you're going to do, Jack, is you're going to feed the start. Just like we did in the mason jar, I'm not going to be making any more bread this week, so I just put my hungry, not fed, you guys saw me do it earlier, now I have a bigger jar than your mason jar. When you go to put that cup in your mason jar, it's going to be like half your mason jar. You're going to immediately have to refeed it and then put it back in your fridge again for another week. So he just added water. You don't want to do that, Jack. Salt. Here we go. Can you move that? Where's the spurtle? Where's the spurtle? See, even Jack makes mistakes. I don't want salt in my starter. There we go. Okay. Could you pour more in? I love these things. Not water. I need flour now. You're all over the place. Wake up. You make this all the time. What am I doing? Get the flour.
Look at my scoop.
Okay. Here's what we do, and we do the same thing every week. The same thing I did in that jar, that little jar, which would be like the average person's using. Now, I'm baking enough for an army all the time, so I'm always having to make more. He will stir, and I will do the same thing I did with the other. I will do it until the stick stands up. And then I can put the lid on, and I put it in the fridge, and I don't touch it for another week. Angela, I don't use metal in my start, but I do use the stainless steel bowl, and I've been doing it for about 12, 15 years now. And I've had no issue. But I'm not using crap aluminum or something. Yeah, okay, did you see that? Stop, put it back in again. It's standing up. Sounds good. Okay. And then I'm not getting mine started. Mine is already established, so I keep mine in the fridge when I'm not using it. Okay. Can you put the lid on? Where'd that glass lid go? There it is. It's over there by the cinnamon. Okay. There we go. Okay, now he's just going to put it straight in the fridge. And by the way, that's the main fridge. We keep that one in because I don't want it ever. I don't even keep... I am so picky about what goes in that fridge. I can't even tell you. I don't want anything ruining that yeast. Okay. I feel like we're kosher around here. We got too many fridges and sinks. Okay, so on the instructions, where did the instructions go? Can you bring them back over here? This is where you start to make your decision, okay? So we've stirred together the water, the salt, and the natural yeast. And we immediately fed the start left in the jar, reclosed the lid, and put it in the fridge. See, we just did those instructions. Now, if we're going to make artisan bread, we would add those options now. So we'd go over here and we'd add these options. If I wasn't going to make artisan bread, I would immediately just begin to add cups of whatever grains of flour that I chose until it was a dough ball, and I would be done for today. If I want to add artisan options, I can add artisan options. Now, I want to go over some of these with you because the reality is sourdough bread should be this easy. It should be salt, water, starter, and some kind of flours, and then leaving it alone so it can do its thing over the next 8 to 12 hours. Okay? But I tend, when I'm going to have friends over, to go a little crazy. Like if I'm going to make rolls, they're not going to be just white flour rolls. The only time I typically use just regular flour by itself and do traditional is when I am making cinnamon rolls, which is what Jack's working on now. Okay? But that's not what we're going to do today. We're going to do some artisan options. And I'm going to let you guys help me decide this, okay? If I add a tablespoon of ginger powder, it will not taste like sourdough bread at all. It will taste like French bread. It's a pretty cool little tip. If I'm going to make sweet bread like the cinnamon rolls, I might add like a 1/4 to 3/4 cup honey to it before I add the grains, the flours. If I'm going to do a really savory bread, I might add some molasses. I don't have to do any of that. If I want unique flavors, I can add between 3 to 6 tablespoons of spices. And you can do any combinations that you can think of. Think like garlic and rosemary and Parmesan cheese, or cinnamon and orange with that honey, or like maybe some zest and some cinnamon and some honey. That would make a really nice warm tasting bread. Chicken, basil, and thyme. You would not believe how good like a chicken bouillon with a little pinch of thyme and basil is. It's really good. Tomato, Asiago cheese, and onion. We have one of the products that we carry is a tomato powder for our food storage company. It's a dehydrated tomato powder. I add it. It makes the bread look like those Like those tomato bagels that are like slightly pink and yummy with little pieces of sun-dried tomato in them and Asiago cheese onion. If you want to add whole garlic cloves, at what point would you add that? Right now. This is the point where you have to make a decision. If you're not making just basic flour bread and you want to go artisan, you do it when it's wet right now. That's when you do it. Okay?
You doing the garlic rosemary?
We're going to let them decide. If you want your breads to have like a cake or a fluffier consistency, you want them to be more American, I say, than the dense European artisan breads, you can add up to a 1/3 cup oil or 3 eggs. This is also if you want it to be seedy. Like one of my favorite breads that I used to buy years ago was like Dave's Killer Bread. It was really seedy bread. I got like this 12-grain bread. It used to be really seedy. This is when I would add seeds or nuts or cracked grains. I've just done cracked grains or any of that, okay? And I wrote down, depending on the type of grains you use, will depend on if the bread's lightweight, medium, or heavy density. So you can see now the big most important thing is right here, 3 to 6 tablespoons of spices. So Jack, let's do our typical roll that we would make for like, let's say a Thanksgiving dinner. Let's add some onion powder. Now we've got up to 6 tablespoons we can add. I don't like a lot of onion, so we'll do just some. There we go. That's good. Not even a tablespoon. And we usually add that Montreal steak seasoning. I always ask the bread, what do you want to be? There you go. That's like 3 to 4 tablespoons right there. So go ahead and dump that in. And then let's add some mustard powder. Not a lot. Now this is spicy mustard. It just gives that heat in the bread. You won't taste it. It's like almost like a, oh, it's brand new. It's not even open. Oop, oop, oop. Here, can you give me your hand? I don't want to dump it in. I don't want to have an issue. Little amount, just a little. Now I'm going to show you what I mean by a little amount. He's bringing it over here. Okay, that's enough for 4 loaves of bread. It will bring a heat and a warmth and a flavor to the bread that people will be like, oh, this roll tastes really warm. I'm not really sure why. And let's do one more. We did onion, Montreal steak seasoning, mustard. Let's do a little bit of sesame seeds to give it texture. I like the other side. Can you open the other side? And do we have any chicken bouillon like the kind in the, that's great. Okay. Okay. Yeah. No poppy seeds. Let's just do sesame seeds and those spices. And let's do a little bit of chicken bouillon, just a little, just to give it some flavor underneath. Now, this is the same rolls I made for Bailey's wedding. That people went like gaga over. Okay, that's about as much as I would add. Not a lot. That was a little bit bigger than a teaspoon. Okay, now we're going to add grains. I could add just white flour if I was so inclined. What kind of flours do we have available? Oh,
red wheat.
okay.
Rye.
I was going to show you really quick in my pantry. See this? I grind flours about once every 2 weeks. This one is red wheat. I didn't show you this in the pantry. Let me go back to the pantry. You're going to see my whole house. Okay. I want to show you when I'm done grinding my flours every couple weeks where I store them. These aren't big buckets. They're just like little 1-gallon buckets. But you can see these are the flours. These are like kombucha, white flour. There's some coconut oil. I use that a lot in baking over other ones. There's some rye flour up there, 9-grain. So I always keep a rotation of several. And sometimes there's buckets behind those two of other ones. I've had rice flour up there, anything I can grind. And I do have an electric grinder, but I permanently keep this grinder that we sell. It's the cheapest grinder on the market you can get that's got this big handle. It's like $125 or something. The other ones with big handles like $300 to $500, so we really like that one. Yeah, let's put just a little minced onion in there, just so it gives it some texture with that sesame seed.
Let me put some on top too.
Yeah, we can put that. Often I'll put some of these nuts and these grains also on top. All right, that's great. All right. So Jack's going to do a combination of, like, this looks like he's going to use red flour, wheat flour, and white flour, which, again, I consider the worst flours in my arsenal.
Otherwise it's too heavy.
Yeah. And these will be under 20 parts gluten per million from 124 or 27,000 this week. So he's going to keep stirring that, and we just keep adding flour as we go. Tell me when you're ready.
Good.
You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's a nice color on it. It's going to make a pretty colored bread when it's done.
Okay.
You want more?
Yeah.
Okay. That metal hook is just strong enough that you can really cut through as the batter gets thick, you can still keep moving it pretty quick of a pace.
When you store it, you don't want to put it in the dishwasher. You want to rinse it off and then store it dry.
Yeah. We take care of that dough hook just like we take care of our baking pans.
Any wood you can
Okay. Tell me when. You just tell me when.
Add that on.
When it begins to form a big ball, when he's stirring it, that's when we stop using the dough hook and finish it up with kneading it by hand. Awesome. See how it's getting a little harder, but he's still managing it. Do you want one more scoop?
Yep.
Okay. There you go. So people ask me all the time, like, how much flour do you use? I don't know. I have no idea.
So you're looking for texture.
I'm looking for a texture and a consistency. Yeah, of course, you can use your KitchenAid and save your arm. You can use any of those. This is not...
If you're going to use a KitchenAid, you keep adding flour to the point where when it's mixing and it's all in a ball, it's when you can see clean stainless steel along the sides.
Yeah, when you're using your KitchenAid, you know when to stop adding flour when it begins to pull away and the sides become clean. It's a good tip. Tell me if you can still hear, because we always... Okay. At this point, I'm going to add one more cup, but he's going to set down the dough hook to the side, and we're going to start, he's going to start. Do you need more than one?
Yep.
One more? Two more? Okay. This is where he's going to start to knead it into a ball.
This is why bakers wear white.
They can't see that the flour spilled all down your black shirt, Jack. Yeah. I'm focused on the bowl. He's all paranoid. I'm like, I'm dirty. By the way, when we knock the dough down tomorrow to bake it, we will do it right here in the bowl. 90% of our breads are made right in the bowl, so the counters don't look like heckola. It just, then I'm not having to deal with flour everywhere. It's just inside the bowl. Well, except for on Jack. See, it's all over Jack now. Yeah. Should have worn an apron. All right. It looks great, babe. So as soon as he's going to knead it for about another minute, we can sit here and watch him. Now, because we let this rise for 8 to 12 hours, what time is it right now?
12.
Yeah, I'm going to end up baking this sometime between 8 p.m. and midnight. It's noon here, so it's going to end up being baked between 8 p.m. and midnight. I don't normally make bread this time of day. I'm only doing this for you. I normally make bread right before I go to bed, so that the next day when I have time to get to it, I can knock it down and put it in the oven. I usually make it on Saturday night. If anybody's ever come to my house, they'll see us making a couple bowls of bread on Saturday night. And, okay, so Jack, show them what we do now. This is so easy, you guys. It's like...
I'm trying to get all the moisture out of it. because the yeast will actually make it moist again.
Oh yeah, just like the yeast becomes liquidy back in the jar in the fridge, your bread will rise up and be a little wetter and stickier than it is when you're doing it right now. But that's a nice, let me show you this nice stretch on that. See the nice, see how it's pulling back? That's what you want with all your breads, is that sort of, okay, so this is what we do. Because it's going to be on such a long rise, we actually take a unscented garbage bag, wrap it around that big bowl. That becomes our garbage bag the next day. Do we have a bowl that's already risen that you made last night? Isn't that what's behind you right here? No, let's use this one. Oh, it's not. Okay, you want to use this one? You haven't knocked this down yet?
No.
Okay.
It's already been knocked down.
Well, that doesn't work. Do we have one that's not been knocked down?
No, that hasn't been knocked down.
Oh, it hasn't. Okay, so Jack's going to show you. He's knocking it down. This is one that rose, what, 10 hours, something like that?
Yep.
Okay, this one rose 10 hours. He made this last night, like late. I don't know, it was like 1 a.m. And he was like, oh, I need to have one to knock down to show him. So when the bread gets to the top of this bowl, when you start to see it underneath this plastic, that's when you know it's time to take care of it. And sometimes it takes 10 hours if it's a warm day.
If you put a lot of whole grain in it, it takes longer to rise.
Yeah. Sometimes it takes 12 hours if it's a cool day and there's a lot of whole grains. Spelted grain, or which is something we don't have time to talk about today, but we sprout our grains and make vegetables out of them too. Then redehydrate them and then regrind them into flour. That's a pretty advanced technique, but it is fantastic for the bread being full of more nutrition than normal. Okay, so this is what Jack does if he's knocking it down after it rose to the top of the rim for 12 hours. He just adds a little more flour because it's a little stickier. And then do you want to put it in a loaf pan?
I'll weigh it.
You're going to weigh it, okay.
So if you do a large batch, then you just weigh it. So that's 2.5 pounds. That'd make one good loaf.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to... The neighbor dogs are barking, setting off our dog. Okay. So you got to do it over here, baby. You can't do it over there. I'm on film. You're so funny. He's like, I'm just going to go put this in the oven. Nope. You got to do it over here. Okay. Okay, so that batch of bread gets set aside for another day. That I won't deal with that till like 12 hours from now. That's the one nice thing about this. You get it made and you just set it aside. Okay, I got 5 minutes worth of battery here unless I plug in and get more juice, so we're almost to the end of this. Okay, now what I do at this point,
Right.
I don't.
Right.
Could you get me a knife? Jack and I have a little bit of different ways that we make our breads. This is the beauty of it. You do it your way. It's totally your way. Okay? I like to do like deep cuts in it so that when it rises, it gets those nice, pretty things on the sides. Okay? I'll do like 3 in a long row. And then I'll take... This is sesame seeds, so I'll take these and I'll like maybe add these to the top. Do you have any of those poppy seeds I like? I'm just trying to make it pretty. There we go, little black poppy seeds. All right, I cover this again and I'm gonna let it rise another hour to 2 hours. And then I'm gonna bake it. So can you hand me the cloth over there so I can cover it? This time I just cover it with a regular cloth. There should be some in the drawer down there. There's the gray ones over there up inside the jar, in the window. Right, look at me. Jar, green jar, window. There you go. Okay, sorry guys. That's what happens in our big old messy kitchen. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna cover that. And I'm just gonna leave it alone until I see the top of that bread, or the top of the, you'll notice this will rise up and you're going to see that it's rise, and I'll just put it in. Okay, I let it rise for 8 to 12 hours. I knock it down, I shape it, I put it in a pan or in roll pans or cinnamon rolls, And then I let it rise again for an hour to 2 hours till it looks good. And then we bake it at, Jack will tell you,
375.
375.